This video is intended to help you with your upcoming user interviews in the Global Virtual Design Sprint. These interviews can occur before your virtual design sprint begins or after your team has created a prototype. Conducting user interviews can help inform your virtual design sprint team about the people they're intending to serve, what their motivations are, and why they choose to do things a certain way. User interviews can also help the team understand what the user thinks of their product, service, or idea, and often help clarify or disprove assumptions the team might initially have about their prototype. To maximize your outcomes for user interviews, I usually recommend the following best practices for setting up your conversations. First, schedule some user interviews before the second week of your virtual design sprint. These interviews can be conducted before you know your team challenge, or after your team decides on one. In either case, you'll be exploring your target audience's understanding of a given topic and their motivations for seeking out particular solutions. Second, try to interview your users in small groups of 2 to 3 people, especially if they know each other. You can even encourage your users to invite other people to their interview to gain additional perspective. No matter what the dynamic, the cross-conversation that occurs between multiple users is often extremely beneficial to hear. Third, come to the interview with an early idea of your own and share it with them. It doesn't matter if it's a quick sketch on a napkin, a short one-page document, or a clickable wireframe of a mobile app. Just keep it short and use this opportunity to gauge their understanding or their motivation to know more. Finally, be sure to record your conversations if at all possible. Just ask for permission before you do so. Your other team members can watch these recorded sessions and submit their observations at their own pace. You can also use a transcription service to document your conversations for easier reading. When you first meet someone you're going to interview, start with some small talk or light conversation. Ask how they're doing, what they've been busy with, or what they're looking forward to in the near future. No matter what topics you decide on, take a few minutes to get to know one another. From there, explain why everyone is coming together for the call, and what you're looking to discuss with the time you'll have together. Write out and share a short list of conversational goals you'd like to achieve with your interviewee. This helps set proper expectations for everyone and frames the upcoming conversation in a meaningful way. Let the interviewee know they are not being tested. There are no right or wrong answers, and no grade will be given at the end of the session. They're only sharing their perspectives and providing insight on the topics you'll be going over. Encourage your user to think out loud. It's not intuitive to say what's on their mind, and we often hold silent counsel instead of speaking out. But the more you can ask the question, "What are you thinking about?" or "What comes to mind when you see this?" the better your user can frame their responses in a way that helps you understand their perspective. If you plan on showing them some initial ideas you have, give them permission to be as straightforward as possible. State very clearly that this is an exploratory conversation where everyone is learning something new. You're simply sharing some ideas and passing along their understanding with the greater virtual design sprint team. They won't be hurting anyone's feelings. Finally, ask for permission to record your session for later review. Even if you explicitly state that you'll be recording the session in your emails that you sent earlier, verify their willingness to be recorded for later review and clearly explain what you'll be doing with the recording once the session is ended. Once you've set the stage with your user, it's time for the interview to begin. Here are some sample questions to get you started. Tell me a bit about yourself and what you do for a living. What does a typical weekday look like for you? What do your weekends look like? What kinds of problems are you dealing with right now? If you could change anything that would alleviate one of these problems, what would it be? Make sure to ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions where it makes sense to do so. Some examples of follow-up questions might be, why is that important to you? How would your life change if you had that? How would you feel if you could make that change permanent? Once you finish your introductory questions, it's time to get into your chosen challenge. I recommend creating a few questions that test the user's knowledge of the challenge you're taking on. You'll also want to create questions that explore the user's personal experience with the challenge and the options your users have when they seek a solution to the problems they deal with. One of the things I like to do is to send my interviewee a list of the questions in advance to get their initial responses. This usually saves a lot of time and helps me spend the majority of my interview asking follow-up questions to clarify their perspectives. Another thing you can do when talking about the challenge is to introduce your initial ideas to get some feedback from your user. The kind of conversation you'll have about your ideas will depend on when you speak to them. If you're showing your ideas before your virtual design sprint has started, lean towards objective questioning, where you'll be trying to measure their understanding of what they're looking at and what it reminds them of. These kinds of questions might sound like, tell me what you're currently looking at. What do you think this is for? Who do you think this is for? Have you seen something like this before? If so, what was it, and where did you see it? If you were to describe this to someone you know, what would you say? If your user asks clarifying questions to better understand what they are seeing, don't help them. Instead, use the phrase, "What do you think?" to move the conversation back to their perspective. Remember, you're seeking their understanding of the content, purpose, and intended audience for your idea. Later on, when you'll be speaking with your users after your team has created a prototype, you'll be asking more experiential questions. These questions may involve exploring different scenarios involving multiple tasks, understanding the purpose of the prototype, and their overall impressions of the user experience. Some of these experiential questions might include, tell me what you're thinking about when you look at this. What do you think this interface is asking you to do? What do you think the purpose of this screen is? If you needed help with this, what would you do? What do you think would happen when you clicked on this link or went to the next screen? Make sure you ask at least 1 or 2 follow-up questions where it makes sense to do so, especially if the user's response is vague or unclear. If team members are observing the session, use a private back channel like a shared Google Doc, WhatsApp, or Slack to help generate more of these follow-up questions. When you're ending your session, thank your attendee for their time right away before asking any additional questions. Gratitude is often saved at the very end of a session, but it's better served right at the end of your main line of questioning. Here are a few sample questions to help bring your session to a close. What was your overall impression of what you experienced today? What were some of the highlights that you remember? What are some things we need to improve? If you could change one thing about our idea, what would it be? Who do you think would be interested in what we're developing? Once you've finished your interview, follow these steps to wrap things up. Post the recording of the interview to either Slack or a private space your team can access. If you have a transcription, be sure to include that as well. Use an online spreadsheet to document the name, date, time, and file location of the interview. You can also include the person's LinkedIn profile for reference, and be sure to indicate if the person has agreed to come back to review the prototype. Notify the rest of the virtual design sprint team that the interview has been completed, with links to all of the resources you've provided in the previous steps. And finally, send a follow-up email to your user, thanking them for their time. You can include links to the video in the transcription if you'd like, as well as a promise to get back to them if they agreed to review the prototype at a later date. If you have any questions about this process, or would like to contribute your own perspective of how you conduct user interviews, post a comment and leave a response when you have some time. Thanks for watching.